The morning of the mission did not feel dangerous. It felt like any other day in the camp. Soldiers were cleaning their rifles, checking their gear, joking, and pretending nothing scared them. But somewhere deep inside, everyone knew that no mission was ever truly routine. Anything could go wrong in seconds. And that was something Lena Morgan understood better than most. Lena was not the strongest soldier in the unit. She was not the tallest or the loudest. She was small, quiet, and most of the time people forgot she was even there. But the people who really knew her knew one thing. She never left anyone behind. She was a combat medic, the kind of soldier who ran toward gunfire, not away from it, because someone might be bleeding, and she refused to let them die alone. That morning, her squad was given a simple task: a patrol through a valley that had seen no enemy activity for weeks. The commander said it was low risk, almost boring. Some soldiers complained it was a waste of time. But Lena didn't complain. She just checked her medical bag 3 times, making sure nothing was missing: bandages, tourniquet, painkillers, field dressings. She was the type of person who always prepared for the worst, even when everyone else expected the best. Her squad had 12 soldiers. Most of them were confident, experienced, and heavily armed. Lena carried no rifle at first, only a pistol. That was her job: heal, not fight. She was the one people called when they were hurt, not when they wanted covering fire. Sometimes the others joked, "Lena, you're safe. Even the enemy won't shoot a medic." Lena always smiled, but she never believed that. Bullets don't care about red crosses. Before they moved out, the squad leader, Sergeant Hale, looked at her and asked the same question he always did. "You good, Doc?" She nodded. She wasn't nervous. She never showed fear even when she felt it. The unit started walking through the narrow valley. The air was quiet, almost too quiet. No voices, no birds, no wind, just boots on sand, one step at a time. Some soldiers relaxed, talking softly, trying to stay awake. Lena walked in the middle, checking the faces of her team, reading their body language. A medic doesn't only look for wounds. She looks for weakness, hidden pain, anything that could turn deadly later. People didn't know much about her past, but they all knew she was different. She had joined the army not to kill, but to save. She had seen war take people she loved, and she had promised herself that if she ever stepped onto a battlefield, she would be the reason somebody made it home alive. But her quiet nature made others underestimate her. Some soldiers treated her like a helper, not a real fighter. They respected her, yes, but they didn't expect anything from her. After all, medics don't lead. Medics don't charge ahead. Medics don't carry the heavy guns. They patch wounds, say hold on, and hope the next bullet doesn't hit them too. But Lena was not the kind of person who needed people to believe in her. She just needed them to survive. As they moved deeper, the radio operator whispered that the signal was weak, but no one worried. The valley was calm. The ground showed no signs of recent movement. Even the squad leader relaxed a little. Still, Lena kept scanning the cliffs and rocks. Something about the silence didn't feel right. Her instincts were sharp. A medic sees too many final breaths to ignore the feeling of danger. She lowered her head and whispered to herself, "Stay ready." She didn't know why she said it, but later, she would remember that moment clearly. That small voice inside her had already sensed what no one else saw coming. 5 more minutes, and the patrol would have been out of the valley. 5 more minutes, and everything would have stayed normal. But war never waits for the right time. The deadliest moments are always the ones that feel safe. Nobody knew it yet, but this was the last peaceful moment they would ever share together. And in less than 10 minutes, Lena Morgan, the quiet medic who walked with a pistol and a bag of bandages, would become the last soldier still fighting. The attack did not begin with a warning. There was no shout, no sound of an engine, no sign of movement. 1 second the squad was walking, tired but calm, and the next second the world exploded. The first blast came from the left side of the valley. A loud, violent boom shook the ground, throwing dust and rocks in every direction. Lena felt the shockwave hit her chest like a punch. For a moment, her ears rang so hard she couldn't even hear her own breathing. She didn't fall, but the soldier walking beside her dropped instantly, his leg torn open by shrapnel. Then the gunfire started loud, sharp, and coming from above. The enemy had the high ground. They were hidden between the rocks, firing down like hunters shooting trapped animals. Bullets hit the ground, the air, the walls. Soldiers screamed. Radios crackled. Someone shouted, "Ambush! Take cover!" Lena's heart raced, but her mind stayed clear. Training took over. She dropped to the ground, pressing her body against the dirt, feeling bullets fly just inches above her head. Dust filled her mouth, her eyes burned, but she forced herself to look around. She saw blood already, heard pain in the voices of men she knew. One was crawling, one was not moving at all, one was hit and crying out for help. Her first instinct was not to grab a gun. It was to save a life. She dragged herself across the ground toward the nearest wounded soldier. His leg was bleeding badly, a deep cut tearing through muscle. She didn't think about the bullets. Her hands were already in her medical bag, pulling out a tourniquet. She wrapped it around his leg and tightened it until his scream almost drowned out the gunfire. "Stay with me," she told him firmly. "You're not dying here. Not today." The soldier nodded weakly, trusting her more than the rifle in his own hands. Another blast shook the valley, this time closer. Lena looked up and saw part of the rock wall breaking, sliding down like a landslide. The enemy wasn't just firing bullets, they were trying to bury them alive. The squad leader, Sergeant Hale, tried to give orders, but the radio was full of static. They had no connection to base, no air support, no backup. They were trapped. Lena heard someone yell, "We need to fall back." But no one could move. The enemy had them pinned. If they stood up, they would be shot. If they stayed down, they would bleed or be hit again. Another soldier, Corporal Ruiz, was hit in the shoulder. He rolled onto his back, blood soaking through his uniform. "Doc!" he shouted. "I'm hit. I can't feel my arm." Lena dragged herself again, every move painful. A piece of shrapnel had cut into her own leg when the first blast hit, but she ignored it. Pain was something she would deal with later. Right now, her hands had work to do. She pressed a bandage into Ruiz's wound, then tied it tight. "Can you still hold your rifle?" she asked. He tried, hand shaking, but he nodded. That small nod meant everything. She didn't save him just to let him die scared and helpless. She saved him so he could keep fighting beside her. More bullets, more dust, more screams. The world had turned into noise and fire and fear. But inside all that chaos, Lena worked like a machine. Calm, focused, fast. But then the worst moment came. Sergeant Hale, the man everyone depended on, was hit. A sniper's bullet caught him in the neck. He fell hard, eyes wide open, mouth trying to speak but no sound coming out. Blood pooled under him. The squad's leader, gone in seconds. For the first time, Lena felt something heavy in her chest. Not fear, something else. The world suddenly looked different. No voice giving orders. No plan to follow. Just survival. The others looked around in panic, waiting for someone to tell them what to do. But there was no one left to lead. Lena reached for Hale, checked his pulse, but she knew instantly. There was nothing to save. She shut his eyes gently. No tears. No time for grief. Not here. When she lifted her head again, she saw movement on the rocks. More enemy fighters closing in, confident, fearless, sure they already won. That was the moment Lena changed. She wasn't just a medic anymore. She reached out, grabbed the rifle lying next to Hale's body, and held it tight. Her injured leg was shaking, her uniform was stained with blood. Some hers, some not. But her eyes were steady. She wasn't going to run. She wasn't going to surrender. And she wasn't letting any more of her team die while she still had breath left. The medic was done patching wounds. Now she was going to fight. The gunfire around her didn't stop, but Lena refused to let panic control her. She had a rifle in her hands now, but her heart was still a medic's heart. She could not ignore the wounded, not while they were still breathing. Every second mattered. Every drop of blood was a race against time. She crawled back to the first soldier she had treated, the one with the torn leg. His face was pale, eyes half open, lips shaking. "Doc," Am I gonna make it? He whispered. Yes, Lena said, even though she didn't know. Her voice had no doubt in it. A medic's job wasn't just to fix the body. It was to keep hope alive. She touched his shoulder gently. But you need to stay quiet and stay low. I'll cover you. The sound of bullets hitting the ground beside her reminded her that she was still exposed. The valley had no real cover, just broken rocks and scraps of ground that were never meant to protect anyone from gunfire. The enemy had planned this ambush well. They knew the squad couldn't climb, couldn't retreat, couldn't run. Lena reached for her medical bag again. She had already used 2 bandages and a tourniquet. Supplies were dropping fast. Every wound needed something different. Some needed pressure to stop bleeding. Some needed airways cleared. Some needed painkillers just so the soldier wouldn't scream loud enough to draw more fire. She moved to the next wounded man, Private Dawson. He was young, younger than her, and he was shaking uncontrollably. His hand was pressed against his stomach, blood leaking through his fingers. I can't breathe, he whispered. You can, Lena told him, her voice firm, but I need you to move your hand. Let me see. He hesitated. He didn't want to look. Some soldiers were brave when fighting, but terrified of their own injuries. She gently pulled his hand away. The wound was deep, not the kind a medic could fix in the middle of a battlefield. But she didn't stop. She folded a bandage 3 layers thick, pressed it onto the wound, and held firm. Dawson's eyes were full of fear. Are we gonna die here? He asked. Lena didn't answer that question. Instead, she looked straight into his eyes and said, I'm here. As long as I'm breathing, nobody is dying alone. You hear me? He nodded. And that was enough. Another round of bullets cracked overhead. One hit the ground so close it sprayed dirt into her eyes. She blinked hard, forcing her vision to stay clear. She heard a voice from behind. Ruiz, the man with the injured shoulder. Doc, they're moving in. We need to fight back. She turned her head. He was right. The enemy wasn't staying far. They were coming closer, step by step, confident, ready to finish the job. Some of her squad were too injured to fight now. Only a few still held rifles, and even they were losing strength. Lena grabbed the rifle again. It felt heavier now, not because of its weight, but because of what it meant. She wasn't choosing between medic or soldier anymore. She had to be both at the same time. She looked at the wounded, at the blood, at the ground that was slowly turning red. If she didn't fight, they would all die. The living, the unconscious, the ones she had saved, all of them would be finished in minutes. So she made a decision no medic ever wants to make, but sometimes has to. She put the rifle against her shoulder, aimed at the rocks above, and fired. The shot surprised even her. It wasn't wild. It wasn't emotional. It was controlled, steady. And she hit one enemy fighter. He dropped. For the first time, the enemy paused, just for a second, surprised that someone down below was still resisting. That second mattered. It gave one of the other soldiers time to reload. It gave the wounded a moment to breathe. It gave Lena a moment to stare at her own hands. The same hands that had been saving lives minutes ago, now taking one. She didn't let guilt touch her. Not now. She wasn't fighting to kill. She was fighting to protect. She had always believed that a medic's job was to keep people alive. Now she understood something deeper. Sometimes, to save a life, you have to pick up the weapon. She fired again, and again. Her body shook, not from fear, but from effort. Her leg was hurting now, the cut from the blast bleeding through her uniform. But she didn't stop. Behind her, Ruiz called out, Doc's firing back. Let's go. The others followed her lead. For the first time since the ambush began, the squad wasn't just surviving, they were fighting. But even as she shot, her eyes kept tracking the injured. Every scream, every gasp, every drop of blood pulled her back to who she really was. She wasn't a killer. She was a lifeline. She wasn't fighting because she hated the enemy. She was fighting because she refused to lose one more man. And deep inside, even with bullets flying, one thought stayed in her mind. I will not let this valley become their grave. That promise, not the rifle, was her real weapon. The gunfire slowly began to fade, not because the enemy stopped shooting, but because the squad had fewer and fewer men left who could return fire. The sound of rifles from Lena's side was getting weaker, slower, and spaced out. Some guns went silent forever. Others dropped because the hands holding them lost strength. Lena knew something had changed. The battle wasn't equal anymore. It was turning into a one-sided hunt. She looked around and counted who was still conscious, who was still holding on. 4 soldiers were too injured to move. 2 more were barely able to sit up. Only 3 were still able to fight, and she was one of them. The enemy knew it too. They were not rushing in. They were waiting, watching. Like wolves circling prey, certain the kill was only a matter of time. Then it happened. A voice she knew very well suddenly went quiet. Sergeant Hale. Lena crawled over to him. Even though she already knew something was wrong. The way his body lay, the stillness of his chest. It said everything before she even touched him. His eyes were half open, staring at nothing. His hand was still gripping his weapon, but it had no life left in it. A bullet had hit him cleanly, a shot that allowed no second chances. Lena froze for a moment, not out of fear, but because she felt something break inside her. Hale wasn't just their leader. He was the one who kept them together, the one they trusted to make the right call, the one who always had a plan. Now there was no plan, no orders, no voice to follow. She whispered, "No, no, not you." But there was no answer. War does not return the names you call. She checked his pulse anyway, knowing the truth, but refusing to accept it. The silence from his body hurt more than her bleeding leg. She closed his eyes gently, the way soldiers do when they have no time to grieve, only time to respect. Ruiz shouted from behind, "Doc, we lost Hale. What do we do now?" Lena didn't look back. She didn't have an answer. She wasn't trained to lead. Medics are trained to keep people alive, not to command the living while fighting off death from all sides. But there was no one else left to make decisions. She took a slow breath. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of what she now understood. The squad leader was gone. The radio was useless. The enemy was closing in. And the wounded were still bleeding. She couldn't just be a medic anymore. She had to be everything. The protector, the fighter, the leader. She reached for Hale's rifle, not because she wanted it but because she had no choice. The rifle felt heavy in her hands, not because of its weight, but because of what it meant. The responsibility of every life still breathing around her was now in her hands. She took a moment, just one moment, to stare at the battlefield. Smoke, blood, bodies, and soldiers who were still alive because she didn't stop. She finally answered Ruiz, not loudly, not like a commander, but with a voice that carried strength in its calmness. "We hold the line," she said. "We don't leave anyone behind." Ruiz nodded. He didn't question her. He didn't ask why she was giving orders now. In war, leadership isn't chosen by rank. It is chosen by who refuses to give up when everyone else breaks. Lena looked at the cliffs again. The enemy wasn't firing, but she could feel their eyes searching, waiting. They thought the squad was already finished. They thought the last shots had already been fired. But Lena wasn't done. Not yet. She tightened the tourniquet on her own leg, wiped the blood from her hands, and steadied the rifle against her shoulder. She wasn't a perfect shooter. She wasn't even sure how much strength she had left. But she had something the enemy didn't expect. She wasn't fighting to survive. She was fighting so others could. She called out to the 2 remaining conscious soldiers, not with fear, but with a tone that sounded like command, even to herself. "Spread out. Low ground. Short bursts. Make them think we still have numbers." It wasn't just a plan, it was a trick. If the enemy believed more soldiers were still alive, they would stay cautious. Caution meant time. Time meant life. The plan worked for a while. Every shot she fired was not just a bullet, it was a message. We are not finished. We are not backing down. We are still here. The wounded looked at her with something between shock and hope. A medic, the quiet one, the one who always carried bandages instead of rifles, was now the only one standing between them and death. And she didn't flinch. The girl who once healed hands now held the weapon. The one who used to follow orders was now giving them. The one they thought would be protected was the one protecting them. She didn't know how long she could last. But she knew one thing. If this was the end, they would not go down helpless. They would go down fighting. Because of her. The air was thick with smoke, dust, and silence. The kind of silence that doesn't mean safety, but danger waiting to strike again. Lena could feel it. The enemy wasn't shooting now, not because they were gone, but because they were thinking, planning, watching. She knew the next attack would be closer, more direct. They had already weakened the squad. Now they would try to finish the job. She checked the rifle in her hands, forcing herself to ignore the pain in her leg. The wound burned, but pain was not the worst thing in war. Stopping was. If she stopped, others died. She looked at the wounded around her, scattered across the rocky ground. Some were unconscious. Some were still awake, staring at her like she was the last bit of hope left in the world. And in that moment she moved again, crawling from one man to another, checking pulses, tightening bandages, pressing down on bleeding wounds. She didn't speak much. There was no time for comfort, only action. But every time a soldier opened his eyes and saw her, they relaxed just a little, because if she was still fighting, maybe they weren't doomed yet. But the truth was heavy inside her. She was running out of medical supplies. She was running out of bullets. She was running out of strength. Still, she didn't stop. She reached Corporal Hart, one of the strongest men in the squad. He had taken 2 bullets, one in the chest, one in the arm. His breathing was rough, shallow. "Doc," he whispered. "Don't waste anything on me." She stared at him, confused. "What are you talking about?" "You need to save the others," he said, forcing a painful smile. "I already know how this ends for me." "No," Lena said sharply, her voice full of fire. "You don't get to decide that. Not while I'm here." He tried to laugh, but the pain stopped him. "I thought you were the soft one." She shook her head. "You thought wrong." She gave him pain relief, stopped the bleeding the best she could, then moved on. Every life still breathing was a battle she refused to lose. But then she heard it, the sound she had been expecting. Footsteps. Not far, not careful, confident. The enemy was coming down from the rocks. Not shooting from a distance anymore. Now they wanted to walk in and finish what they started. Lena gripped the rifle tighter, pressing herself against the ground. She looked at Ruiz, the only other soldier still able to fire. He nodded. No words needed. They both knew this was the point where they either fight or everyone dies. The first enemy fighter appeared, stepping over a rock, scanning the area, expecting to find only bodies. He did not expect Lena. She fired first. A clean shot. He fell. The next man ran forward. Ruiz got him. Then more came. The firefight began again, but this time it wasn't long distance. It was close, personal. Every bullet counted. Every second mattered. Lena didn't shoot like a trained sniper. She shot like someone who refused to let death win. Her hands shook, her arms burned, but her aim stayed steady where it mattered most. Ruiz shouted, "We're almost out. I only have 1 mag left." Lena checked her own. Almost empty. She looked at the wounded, at the bodies, at the blood, at the ground her brothers in uniform had fought on. She wasn't going to let this be the ending. She took a deep breath, and in that breath, she stopped being the medic the squad knew. She became something else. She stood up. Pain shot through her leg, but she didn't fall. She adjusted her aim, fired again. This time with anger, with purpose, with a promise she made silently. "If I'm the last one standing, then I will stand until my last breath." The enemy hesitated. They had expected a dying squad, not a wounded soldier who fought like she had nothing left to lose. But she did have something left to lose. Every life behind her. Every soldier still breathing. Every person who believed she was just a medic until now. She fired again. 1 more down. Then again. Her fingers hurt. Her shoulder ached. The rifle felt heavier every second. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't just saving lives. She was protecting them. And the truth hit her like a wave. She wasn't fighting because she loved war. She was fighting because she could not watch death take people she could still save. It wasn't hate that kept her going. It was loyalty. It was duty. It was love, the hardest kind of love, the kind that makes you stand between a bullet and someone who can't move. She wasn't just a medic anymore. She was the shield. She was the wall. She was the reason the wounded still had hope. And the enemy? They were finally starting to understand something they never expected. The smallest soldier on the field was the one they should have feared the most. The rescue team finally arrived, but what they saw left them speechless. Smoke was still rising from the battlefield. The ground was covered with broken equipment, spent bullets, and the remains of a fight that clearly wasn't normal. They had been told that the unit had been ambushed and most soldiers were either wounded or missing. But no one expected what they were about to witness. As they moved forward carefully, their eyes caught something unbelievable. One person was still standing, holding a rifle, breathing heavily, clothes torn, blood on her arm, yet still ready to fight. It was the same woman they thought had already been rescued earlier. She was the medic, the one who was supposed to be taken to safety. But instead of escaping, she had turned back and stayed to protect the few who were still alive. Her face was tired, but her eyes were sharp. She didn't act like a wounded soldier. She moved like a trained fighter. The rescue team froze for a moment because they couldn't believe it was her. She was injured, but she was the last one still standing. Just a few feet behind her, two soldiers were lying on the ground, badly injured but alive, because she didn't leave them. She had dragged them, treated them, and defended them for hours. Anyone else would have given up. But she stayed. She knew she wasn't just a medic anymore. She was their only shield. The rescue team lowered their weapons and slowly walked toward her. She didn't relax until she confirmed who they were. Her body was shaking, not from fear, but from exhaustion. She had been fighting nonstop even after being shot. When they asked her why she didn't leave with the first evacuation group, her answer stunned everyone. She said, "Because I promised them I wouldn't leave anyone behind." Those words hit the soldiers like a punch. In war, promises are hard to keep. But she had kept hers, even when it meant risking her own life. She didn't think about medals, rank, or orders. She only thought about her people. As they moved the wounded soldiers onto stretchers, one of them grabbed her hand weakly and whispered, "You saved us? You're the reason we're alive." She didn't smile. She didn't act like a hero. She simply said, "No, you fought too. I just did my job." But everyone knew she did much more than her job. A medic is trained to heal, not to pick up a rifle and hold the line alone. Yet she had done both. She healed them, then fought for them. She wasn't just a soldier with a gun. She had the heart of a guardian. One of the rescue officers radioed headquarters and said, "We found them, but you need to know this. The last one fighting was the medic." There was silence on the radio. No one expected that. When they finally put her on a helicopter, she didn't want to sit. She wanted to stay awake and make sure the others were safe. Even when her body was weak, her mind was still in battle mode. She kept asking, "Are they stable? Are they breathing? Did we get everyone?" Only when the doctor on board told her, "You did enough. Let us handle it now," did she finally close her eyes. She wasn't unconscious. She was just tired. Tired after fighting for every heartbeat, every breath, every life she refused to lose. Outside, the battlefield was silent now. But her story had just started to spread. Soldiers who saw her fight began telling others. They couldn't believe a wounded medic stood alone against enemies and survived. In a place where bullets decided who lived, her courage was stronger than any weapon. Some said she should get a medal. Others said she deserved a statue. But the ones who truly understood were the men whose lives she saved. For them, she was more than a hero. She was proof that one person, even wounded and alone, can still change the ending. Because sometimes the strongest warrior is the one no one expected to fight. The helicopter landed at the base hospital, and doctors rushed to take the wounded soldiers inside. The medic, still bleeding from her arm, refused to be treated first. She kept pointing to the others, saying, "Help them before me." Even though she could barely stand, her priority was still her team. The nurses tried to convince her to sit, but she shook her head. She watched each soldier get taken into the emergency room, counting them one by one. Only when she was sure all of them were alive did she finally allow herself to rest. But even then, she didn't lie down. She just sat against a wall, staring at the floor, still holding her rifle like she was ready to fight again. A senior officer walked in, surprised to see her there. He had already read the report. A single medic held off the enemy and saved 2 soldiers alone. He expected to meet someone proud, someone talking about bravery. But instead, he saw a quiet woman who didn't care about praise. She just looked tired, like she had been fighting more than enemies. She had been fighting time, pain, and fear. He asked her, "Do you realize what you did out there?" She looked up slowly and said, "I didn't do anything special. I just stayed." Those 5 words hit him harder than a bullet. I just stayed. Staying when others would have run. Staying when fear said leave. Staying when she was wounded and alone. That was not ordinary. That was courage in its purest form. The officer told her that the command was planning to award her a medal for bravery. But she didn't react. She simply replied, "Give it to them instead. They fought too." Later that night, something happened that no one expected. The 2 soldiers she saved woke up in the hospital. The first thing they asked was not about their injuries, they asked about her. When the nurse said she was okay, both men cried quietly. They knew that if she had left, they would have died in that field. She didn't save just their bodies. She gave them a second chance at life. The next morning, soldiers who had heard her story began visiting her. Some came to thank her. Some came because they couldn't believe a medic fought like a frontline warrior. One soldier said, "You fought like 10 men." She just smiled and said, "No, I fought because I had to." Slowly, the news traveled beyond the base. Other units started talking about her. People who never met her started calling her the medic who wouldn't leave. In a world full of strong soldiers, her strength was different. Hers came from loyalty, not orders. From heart, not rank. But there was something she still didn't know. Her actions had changed the way others looked at medics. Many soldiers had always believed medics were only helpers, not fighters. But now they knew a medic could be the last line of defense if needed. She proved that carrying a first aid kit didn't mean weakness. It meant responsibility. Days passed. Her wound healed slowly, but her mind stayed sharp. She wanted to get back to duty. The doctors told her she needed rest. But rest felt like punishment to her. She wasn't used to sitting still. She was used to running toward danger, not away from it. One afternoon, the 2 soldiers she saved were wheeled into her room. They couldn't walk yet, but they saluted her from the bed. She laughed and said, "Don't salute me. I just did what anyone should do." One of them replied, "No. Others talk about courage. You lived it." For the first time, she didn't argue. She just looked down, trying to hide the emotion in her eyes. She didn't want to be treated like a hero. She only wanted one thing, that every soldier knew they would never be left behind, not while someone like her was still breathing. Before leaving, one soldier said something that stayed with her forever. "You didn't just save our lives. You showed us what real strength looks like." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The truth was already written in the battlefield where she stood alone, holding a rifle with one hand and hope with the other. And even though the war wasn't over, something had already changed. The legend of the medic who fought like a warrior had begun. Days later, she finally opened her eyes in a quiet hospital room. The battle was over, at least for now. She felt the soft sheets under her hand and the bandages wrapped around her arm. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then the memories came back like a wave. The gunfire, the smoke, the cries for help, the silence at the end, and finally the sound of the helicopter. She tried to sit up, but pain shot through her body. Her muscles felt heavy, as if she had been holding the world on her shoulders. But even then, her first thought wasn't about herself. She turned her head and asked the nurse, The others? Are they alive? The nurse smiled and said, "Because of you, yes, they're alive." Her eyes closed, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. Not from pain, but from relief. She had fought, not to be remembered, but so they could live. And now they were living. As she lay there, people began visiting her room. First came her commander, who stood near her bed and looked at her with a mix of pride and disbelief. He told her that the army had already written a report about her bravery, and that she would receive a medal, one of the highest honors. But she didn't smile. Medals didn't matter to her. What mattered was that no one had died because she stopped fighting. Later, journalists wanted to interview her. They wanted to know what she was thinking when she picked up the rifle. They wanted her to describe the moment she realized she was the only one still fighting. But she didn't like answering those questions. She only said, "I stayed because someone had to. I stayed because they were still breathing." Her story went beyond the base. Soldiers from different units sent her letters. Some wrote, "You gave us hope." Others said, "You proved that courage has no rank." But one message touched her the most. It was from a young girl who wrote, "I want to be a medic like you one day, someone who protects and fights." That message made her smile for the first time in days. She never wanted attention, but if her story gave someone strength, then it was worth it. Months passed, and her body healed slowly. Doctors told her she could retire with honor. They said she had already done more than most soldiers do in a lifetime. But she refused. She didn't want to leave the service. She wanted to return to her team, return to the field, return to the place where courage is not a word. It is a choice. When she was finally strong enough to walk again, she went to the training grounds. The same 2 soldiers she saved were there, alive because of her. They saluted her with tears in their eyes. She returned the salute, but she knew something inside her had changed forever. She was no longer just a medic. She had become a symbol, a reminder that even in war, humanity can survive. One evening, during a ceremony, she stood on a stage with her uniform cleaned and pressed, the medal pinned to her chest. People clapped, cameras flashed, but she didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a soldier who simply did her job. The hardest job, the one where your heart must stay soft even when the world around you turns to fire. When it was time for her to speak, she didn't give a long speech. She looked at the crowd and said only this: "A soldier is not someone who loves war. A soldier is someone who refuses to let others die in it." The room went silent. Those words would be remembered long after the war ended. She walked off the stage quietly, the way she had always lived, not looking for applause, but for purpose. She returned to her unit the next week. Some new recruits stared at her like she was a legend, but she didn't act like one. She trained like everyone else, carried her medic bag, and tied her boots the same way. She didn't want to be treated differently. She just wanted to be useful again. But something in the army did change because of her. Medics were now trained in deeper combat skills. Soldiers no longer joked that medics only carry bandages. They respected them as warriors with 2 weapons, a rifle and mercy. She had rewritten what it meant to be a medic. Years later, her name was still spoken in training camps and war rooms. Not because she was perfect, but because she proved that even when a person is tired, wounded, and alone, they can choose to stand. She didn't fight to be remembered, but she was remembered because she fought. And somewhere, deep inside her, she carried one quiet truth. She wasn't the only one still fighting that day because she was strong. She was the only one still fighting because she refused to let courage die before she did.